Jaren Jackson Jr. has won Defensive Player of the Year for the 22-23 NBA season. Credit to him and the Grizzlies, he was fantastic defensively this season. But was he the best defender in the league this year? Let's see what the numbers say. Now, I know a lot of people say there's no good stats to measure defense in the NBA, but I disagree. I've compiled 12 different defensive stats grouped into 3 categories, which illustrate defensive value in a variety of ways. Then I ranked every player in the NBA by each stat and added them all up to see who should have been the Defensive Player of the Year this season, according to the numbers. We can start closest to the basket with the at-rim stats. For instance, you might be aware that the league leader in blocks per game was Jaren Jackson Jr. He dominated that stat, insanely swatting 3 shots per game this season. Second and third were Nick Claxton and Brook Lopez, both at 2.5 blocks per game. Then, Giannis Antetokounmpo led the league in defensive rebounds, followed by Nikola Jokic and Nikola Vucevic. But what about defensive box-outs? Boxing out is often just as important as actually grabbing the rebound, but it doesn't show up in the traditional box score. The league leaders there were Mitchell Robinson and Bam Adebayo. Finally, how about opponent field goal percentage at the rim? This might be the single most important defensive stat on the whole board. If you can hold your opponent to a poor shooting percentage around the basket, it's insanely valuable because those are typically the easiest shots for offenses. Now, this list is kind of skewed by random players only playing a single game all season, so we'll say amongst players who played at least 1,000 minutes this year, and in that case, the league leader was, once again, Jaren Jackson Jr. He incredibly held his opponents to 46.9% shooting at the rim, and in this case, you obviously want to have the lowest number possible. Second was Brook Lopez at 50.2%. For comparison, the league's worst performer here with our minutes requirement was Eric Gordon. Opponents shot over 86% at the rim when he was defending. So, now that we have those 4 at-rim defensive stats in place, let's see who the league leaders are for all of them combined. Unsurprisingly, they're all big guys, and number 1 is the Brooklyn Nets' Nick Claxton, who is in the top 10% in all 4 of those stats. As I mentioned, he was second in the league in blocks, and he held opponents to just 52% around the basket. Second in overall rim stats was Ivica Zubac, followed by Anthony Davis, Rudy Gobert, and the rookie Walker Kessler. Even though Jaren Jackson was first in blocks and first amongst eligible players in opponent shooting at the rim, his rebounding and boxing out was less impressive, and so his overall rank in this category suffered as a result. Alright, let's move on now to the next category, which is open court defensive stats. It's mostly going to be smaller players like guards and wings dominating these stats because that's who's usually playing defense out on the perimeter. So starting off with steals, it's the most recognizable stat from this category, and so if we apply our minutes played filter again, OG Anunoby led the league with 1.9 steals per game, and he was followed by Fred VanVleet, Jimmy Butler, and DeLon Wright. Moving on, we have charges drawn, which is a unique skill that certain players excel at. It's all about timing and being willing to put your body on the line for the sake of defense. For this stat, I'm going to lower the parameter down to 500 minutes played because the number 1 player in the NBA this season by far at drawing charges only played 916 minutes, but it was the rookie big man for the Oklahoma City Thunder, Jalen Williams. Note, this is big man Jalen Williams, not the wing Jalen Williams, who's a contender for Rookie of the Year. Nonetheless, he impressively drew 0.88 charges per game this season, by far the most in the NBA, and he was followed by Kevin Love, Kenrich Williams, and Jalen Brunson. Next, we have deflections, which is pretty similar to steals. The 2 Raptors are once again in first and second, Fred VanVleet and OG Anunoby, with Shai Gilgeous-Alexander in third. Finally, we have defensive loose balls recovered, which is our last stat in the category, and once again, it's similar to steals and deflections, but a few new names appear in the top 10. This one's a little different because players who might not have the fastest hands or the best defensive instincts might struggle to actually get steals and deflections, but loose balls recovered is more dependent on hustle and, like drawing charges, putting your body on the line, diving to recover a loose ball. So, a few noteworthy names here: LaMelo Ball in 5th, Donovan Mitchell in 8th, and Anthony Davis. He's the only big man in the top 20, he's 12th. Okay, so with our 4 open court defensive stats in place, let's see who the league leaders are for all 4 of them combined. Surprisingly, number 1 is not OG Anunoby and it's not Fred VanVleet. It's a name we haven't mentioned yet, it's Herb Jones with the New Orleans Pelicans. He was in the top 20 for all 4 stats. He's 7th in steals, 15th in charges drawn, 6th in deflections, and 19th in loose balls recovered. That's just remarkable consistency across those various stats and illustrates his consistent tenacity and hustle on defense. After Jones, we do have OG Anunoby in 2nd, then it's Alex Caruso in 3rd, and Marcus Smart in 4th. I think that's a pretty fair top 4 in terms of open court defense. Caruso was the only other guy besides Herb Jones who was in the top 5% for all 4 categories. Alright, and finally, our last category of defensive stats is advanced metrics. These are derived mostly from on-off data, meaning is your team winning or losing the minutes that you're on the court, specifically in this case on the defensive end. Theoretically, these stats should be able to capture a player's overall impact defensively, even if their contributions sometimes go overlooked by the other box score stats. So starting out, we've just got defensive rating. This one's pretty simple. It's just how many points the opposing team is scoring on a per-game basis while you're on the court. This is another one where the lower the number is, the better. And again, we're going to impose our 1,000 minutes played parameter, and when we do, we can see that the top 5 is led by Dennis Smith Jr. and Sam Hauser. Those are kind of surprising players to be in first and second, but then in third, fourth, and fifth, we see some more familiar names: Alex Caruso, Brook Lopez, and Jaren Jackson Jr. Moving on, let's take a look at defensive win shares. This one is similar to defensive rating, but it tries to project out how many wins a player's defense contributed to their team's total. It could be argued that this stat, more than any other that we're using, unfairly attributes credit to players on defensively dominant teams. Case in point, with our minutes restriction in place, 9 of the top 10 players in this stat come from just 3 teams: the Bucks, the Cavaliers, and the Grizzlies. Granted, those are 3 elite defensive teams, but does Ja Morant really deserve to be in 9th behind Jaren Jackson Jr. in 8th? Or is he merely reaping the defensive benefits of being on the court with Triple J? I think the answer is pretty clear, but nonetheless, we'll keep this stat in the fold because I think it's good to have a variety of statistical perspectives represented, even if a couple are a little duplicative. For what it's worth, Anthony Davis is the only player in the top 10 for that stat who's not from one of those 3 teams. But moving on, our final 2 stats are both proprietary advanced metrics, which, like the last 2, rely on on-off data, but unlike the last 2, incorporate much more to provide a robust picture of defensive impact. The first is from the website 538, and it's the defensive version of their Raptor metric. With our minutes restriction in place, the top 3 performers here are familiar names once again. Number 1, Alex Caruso. Number 2, Brook Lopez. And number 3, Anthony Davis. This seems like a pretty compelling list so far, except it notoriously overrates certain players, notably Nikola Jokic, who is 4th. Jokic's defense has been the subject of much consternation over the years, especially since he's won 2 consecutive MVPs. Now, I don't think he's a terrible defender by any means, but I think it's fair to say he's not the 4th best defender in the NBA. At any rate, Raptor is still a valuable stat nonetheless, so we'll add it to the list and carry on. So that brings us to our final stat that we're considering, and it's another all-in-one metric, this time from the website bballindex.com. It's the defensive version of their LeBron metric. No, it has nothing to do with the player LeBron, it's just an acronym. Luck-adjusted player estimate using a box prior regularized on-off. Have the nerds gone too far? Perhaps. Anyways, out of all the stats we've seen, I think this one might be the best single stat in terms of capturing overall defensive value. The top 7 are Triple J, Lopez, Claxton, Mobley, Kessler, Draymond, and Caruso. Not a bad list. Okay, so now that we have those 4 advanced metrics in place, let's see who the league leaders are in all 4 of them combined. Unsurprisingly, the top 3 are Brook Lopez, Alex Caruso, and Jaren Jackson Jr. Draymond Green, at 7th, also stands out. He is a classic example of a player whose impact, especially on defense, can sometimes be overlooked by the traditional box score stats. Things like communication, versatility, and intelligence don't show up on the box score, but his teams are consistently elite on defense while he's on the court, and that's borne out by the advanced metrics. Alright, so we've gone through all 3 categories and all 12 defensive stats. I think we've highlighted a lot of incredible defenders in the NBA this season, but I want to know who had the best defensive season in the league. So what we need to do now is compile all of our rankings for the 12 stats and see who comes out on top. So without further ado, the number 1 defensive player in the NBA this season using all 12 of our defensive stats, Anthony Davis with the LA Lakers. His unique combination of elite rim protection, fast hands on the ball, versatility and speed in the open court, and the ability to switch on to smaller players means Davis can do it all on the defensive end. To illustrate this, he ranked 6th in the league in blocks per game, but also 12th in the league in defensive loose balls recovered. Simply put, he's an elite defender everywhere on the court. And the same could be said for our number 2 player overall. That was Draymond Green. Perhaps a bit overlooked this year due to the Warriors' underwhelming regular season, Draymond was still his usual dominant self on defense. Like AD, he is uniquely capable at guarding traditional big men while also not out of his depth switching onto smaller ball handlers on the perimeter. Then, rounding out the top 6, we had the actual Defensive Player of the Year, Jaren Jackson Jr. at 3, obviously representing the best of the best in terms of the rim protectors. Then OG Anunoby at 4, potentially the best wing defender in the NBA. Jarrett Allen at 5, the anchor of the league's best team defense this season. And finally, Alex Caruso at 6, probably the best guard defender in the league. So that's the list, and one caveat before we go. One criticism you could levy against most of the stats we used here is that they are per game stats, not total stats, meaning a player could miss a significant portion of the season and still dominate this list. And that's kind of the case with our number one player, Anthony Davis. As usual, he missed a big chunk of time this season, only playing 56 games. If we used total stats rather than per game stats, AD would undoubtedly be nowhere near the top 10. Obviously, if you're not on the court, you're not contributing anything to your team's defense. However, I wanted this list to be more indicative of the best defenders this season, not necessarily the most valuable defenders this season. The MVP award has value in the name, so I think weighting games played heavily in that case makes a lot of sense. But for Defensive Player of the Year, I view that award more as a recognition of the league's most elite defenders, with less emphasis placed on games played. But again, it's totally fair to view DPOY as more of a value-added award like MVP. It's all in the eye of the beholder. Alright, so that's it. Our top 6 defensive players in the NBA for the 22-23 season. Once again, we had Anthony Davis first, Draymond Green second, Jaren Jackson Jr. third, OG Anunoby fourth, Jarrett Allen fifth, and Alex Caruso sixth. But what do you think? Was Triple J a deserving DPOY, or should it have been Anthony Davis or one of those other guys? And are we missing anybody else? Are there stats that we left out that might have shed light on another aspect of defense? Let me know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this episode, subscribe to NBA Recap. Thanks for tuning in.